John Lund as
Johnny Dollar.
Bill Wesley, Johnny. What do you know about oil wells?
Well, I know I wouldn't mind owning one. Why?
We've written a floater policy on drilling rigs for the Van Oosterhout Oil Company in Sumatra. $60,000 worth of equipment was destroyed last week en route to their new test field.
There's something wrong with this?
We're willing to pay off.
Well, so why call me?
Well, that's a twist, Johnny. Van Oosterhout doesn't want the money.
Well, what does he want?
Our best investigator for 3 weeks.
Why?
He didn't say. But you know these oil men, probably just rich enough to want to satisfy some idle curiosity.
Yeah, well, I'm just broke enough to help him do it.
We'll return to our program in a moment. But first, I'd like to talk to you about housekeeping. Recently, a woman was interviewing a prospective maid and asked her how she was on light housekeeping. Well, I'm sorry, ma'am, said the young lady. I never kept a lighthouse. I admit that's an old joke, but it generally gets a laugh. However, housekeeping is no joke. That's a job from which no one can escape, whether he lives in a house, an igloo, a military barracks, or a governmental building. Yes, housekeeping is a very important job, even in our government. Someone has to see that the plumbing doesn't leak, that electricity, oil, and coal aren't wasted, that the garden is kept in good shape, that the animals are fed, and that the people have a place outdoors in which to enjoy themselves. Actually, all these governmental household tasks are the work of the Department of the Interior, which at one time was called the Home Department. The biggest job of the department is conservation, the protection of the things that make our country a good place in which to live. The land, water, oil, coal, forests, minerals, fish, and wildlife. These are our natural resources. If it weren't for the conservation work of the Interior Department, before too long, all the farm and grazing lands would be washed or blown away, and all the wildlife would disappear from our fields and forests. Another important job of the department is the development of new natural resources and the caring for our national parks where people are free to go sightseeing or set up camp. And during wartime, the Secretary of the Interior has a special job, namely, making sure that sufficient oil and other fuels are available to our armed forces and defense industries. Yes, our governmental housekeeper, the Department of the Interior, has a most important and vital job in maintaining the comfort and welfare of every citizen of the United States.
Expense account submitted by Special Investigator Johnny Dollar to Home Office, Eastern Indemnity and Insurance Company, Hartford, Connecticut. The following is an accounting of expenditures during my investigation of the Carboniferous Dolomite matter. Expense account item 1, $1,013.40. Airfare and incidentals between Hartford and Medan, Sumatra. Expense account item 2, $1.50, cab fare to the offices of the Van Oosterhout Oil Company. The roughly timbered shack with corrugated tin roof didn't spell rich oil man to me, nor did Peter Van Oosterhout himself.
No doubt you are wondering why I proposed such a strange agreement with your company, Mine Dollar.
Well, that question had occurred to me, yes.
So, I will explain that. It's not because I am a rich man, but because I am a gambler.
You're gambling $60,000 against what?
An oil well, Mine Dollar. And I need your help to keep the game honest.
Well, what kind of a game do you want to deal me in?
My rigging equipment was being transported by truck to my test well north of Achin. It was buried beyond recovery by a landslide, one which I believe was caused by a deliberate nitroglycerin explosion.
The game sounds rough.
It is not the first thing that has happened. Drill heads have been dropped into the bore, drilling shafts sawed and then welded so they would snap under pressure. The list is endless.
And you think you're up